She's black, he's white, they figure it out. America's third rail is what they're talking about. He's white, she's black, there's no need to fight. Microaggressions happen, but they find the light.
Okay, so I'm here today with Tania and Paul Traynor in Tania's kitchen on Dodge Street in Evanston, which is the world headquarters of their podcast, Race Bait. A black woman, a white man, they talk about racism, so you can too. And you can find their podcast at Podbean with an N.
Also available on iTunes.
So we're going to spend time today talking about their podcast, when, how, and why it started, and what they've discovered through their conversations. But first, you should know that they are going to be doing a live broadcast of their podcast at Steppenwolf Theatre at 7 o'clock on Monday, July the 16th. And tickets are, I think, $10.
That's right.
$10. And you can get them on the Steppenwolf website. I think that's the only place you can get them.
Currently, yeah.
Exactly. So the bottom line is we all need to talk about racism, and it's a really hard conversation. And Paul and Tania do it and role model it with grace and humor and honesty, and show people how it's done. So what I thought was, first what we could do is just ask you a little bit about what people can expect from your live show, just so that people know about that, and then we'll get into what your podcast is all about.
Sure.
Absolutely. We've actually just announced our full lineup now, so this is a scoop.
Oh,
But
awesome.
You want to?
Yeah, so we're very excited. Heidi Stevens from Chicago Tribune's Balancing Act is going to join us, and partly because she's so funny and smart, and her articles are great, and she addresses a broad range of issues, but she has a real sensitivity towards racial equity and injustice, and so we're very excited about that. And we also have Antoine McKay, who's a wonderful improvisational actor in town. He's on Empire and Patriot, Amazon's Patriot. He's also a producer at McKay Arts, and so he's going to be on. And we're going to do kind of the flip, and we're going to have specific conversations led by questions that we have for them, and try to get sort of as real and transparent and raw with them as we can. And we're also going to have audience interaction. So it's an opportunity for us to, we have audience interaction on our Facebook page, but this time we're actually going to be able to have them participate and engage a little bit. And we're going to have, we can't announce the musicians yet, but we have some live music as well. So it's going to be a great night.
Oh, it's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And it's a little, we kind of put it in a neat little bow here, because obviously Antoine and Heidi are phenomenal guests, but we also thought we'd want to try to invite a white woman, a black man, and just kind of see, like, if we flip that dynamic, what might be inherent in that, which is kind of cool. And, we've said it before on the show, for those of you who don't watch our show, people and your listeners who haven't done it, we like to address all forms of systemic racism, but we talk about black and white racism as America's pastime.
Yeah.
This is really
the third rail.
The third rail, the history,
foundational
the foundational, and the systemic racism that exists today is rooted largely in communities of color that are black. Hispanics are catching up.
Well, but also,
it's a different vibe.
Yeah, and also part of that though is we talk a lot about colorism on the show, which is really where race is based in terms of, like, on a scale from white to black. It addresses the range of skin color in between. So when we keep sort of attacking it from that side of black and white, that doesn't mean we're ignoring other minorities, right? But again, the sort of, it exists between that scale, and we also try to include other voices as well, but don't feel as if we're ignoring them when we focus black-white.
And I wanted to ask you a little bit about, explain in your own words how and when it started, why it started, how you know each other, how you met.
Want to take that, Paul?
Sure, yeah, I'll start. So Tania and I met on a corporate gig through a mutual actor and producer and corporate guy named Jeff Rogers. Who's a well-known improviser and corporate spokesman in Chicago. So we did 2 shows together where we were kind of paired up as kind of narrators or framing the thing and all, and we just hit it off. I remember we were in Orlando for the first one, and you just happened to wander out after we checked in, and I was sitting in having lunch, and you said, we chatted for a while, and we hit it off. Tania's very funny and smart and on the ball, so I just liked her right away. I had been kind of stewing on, and then afterwards stewing on more, an idea of trying to talk about systemic racism and black and white racism in Wilmette and in New Trier Township, because where I live, it is, almost the black population is almost non-existent. It's a percent, or less than 2% for sure, maybe less than 1%. And I think there's such a problem around, for people that want to be allies, there's this notion of white fragility that makes it really, really hard for white people who even have a good heart or good sense to kind of sit in conversations of systemic racism, and I'm the first one to admit it, because it feels like a personal attack, you know. And so I thought this would be something that was important to do. I wanted to have a live event at the Wilmette Theater, which is our local theater, and so I thought Tania would be the perfect co-host, but then when I met her for coffee, things kind of changed. So do you want to pick it up there?
I hijacked everything.
You did.
And he introduced the concept to me, and I was interested, and when we met up again, we just started having sort of a very honest conversation about our experiences with race. And as we were talking and sharing, I'm like, and I love podcasts and listen to many. So as we were talking and sharing, I'm like, this is a podcast. I think we should try. And Paul was willing to try with me, and a week later we were here at this very kitchen table recording. So it was really organic, which led us to feel like this is a sweet spot. One of those times where it's like it wasn't complicated. We had Karen Multer who recorded our theme song for us within days. And all of a sudden we were recording, and it was sort of like a first date. We were like, let's try it out. Let's see if it you know, what's the word? Jive? Not jive.
Jive?
Jive, but that's the word. And we did. And we've been recording ever since.
Yeah, and that's, wow, it was like within 5 days, and we had not only the theme song, which our friend wrote for us, and she, you know, hit it, knocked it out of the park, but we decided on a name, which neither of us had thought about beforehand. It just came up. We decided on an idea for a logo. We whipped that up, and I mean, we had all, like, the first show was like,
And when was that, like a year ago?
No, like, it's 2 years coming up October.
How many podcasts have you done? How many episodes?
Thousands.
Thousands?
I don't know. How many have we done?
We've actually done 2 seasons worth, and we're coming up. The next episode that we release will be our 50th episode.
Really?
Yeah, it was. I noticed that the other day. Yeah.
So, Paul, tell me a little bit more about you and, you know, what you do in your day job. I know that you live in Wilmette. I know that you were instrumental in bringing out the issue of super right-wing people coming into Nutria to stop Diversity Day, or I think that was what it was called. So I know that, but tell me a little bit more about who you are and why this matters to you.
Sure. So I am a father of 5. I live in Wilmette. I make my living as a corporate presenter, so I write and produce media for corporations, mostly at trade shows and sales events. So when they're wanting to do marketing pitches or in-house events, I'll help them put that together. And then I go and I act as the face of the company. So I'll either do technical demos sometimes, or I'll do little marketing pitches, and, you know, it's like, a lot of times it's like infomercials with free t-shirts kind of thing, you know, and they're short and we do them all day. So, but I've been doing that for about 20 years. About 12 years ago, I made a horror movie called Witch's Night, because I'd always wanted to do it. And through that, I kind of just learned, again, the rudimentary stuff of editing, and really liked it. And so now I kind of split between video production and then content and media for live events and trade shows.
And have issues of race and activism and that kind of thing always been part of what you do, or is it a new thing since Donald Trump?
You know, it's both. I mean, I feel like you know, I'm the youngest of 7. My parents are Irish immigrants. I grew up in a very, you know, lily-white rural area. When I go back to Ireland, it's a country where, you know, I think I maybe saw one person of color until, I mean, not so much these days, but as a kid in the summers there. And then, you know, we had a couple of black kids across the street. I don't think I've ever talked about this with you. There was a girl named Lauren who lived right across the street, and we'd like knock on her door and try to hang out with her a little bit, but it didn't ever, like, she would come out some, but she didn't really hang out, and I think her mom was single, but that was kind of my first, you know, experience of it. And then a kid in class who I had kind of some bad interactions with because I was insensitive and didn't know better. Then I went to a predominantly black high school. I moved to Chicago, and I wanted to think I was very, you know, kind of much more diverse in my friendships and all that. I don't really think that was true. My wife is an Evanston native. We wanted to live in Evanston. We ended up in New Trier Township because our oldest son has special needs, and so that was where we needed to be, is in Wilmette. But I think after Trump, like so many people, I really had this jarring sense of like, oh my God, what the hell just happened? And, you know, felt, because the data supports it, that race just drove that so much, you know, race and xenophobia and homophobia and, you know, what's the misogyny, is that it? You know, all of these things that drove it were really there. And so again, I wanted to say, like, how can we have this discussion that we have to have? Because my initial thought is, I'm not really great at this. I'm open to learn and I want to do this, but like, if we don't, as progressives, learn how to talk to each other in ways that we don't get off, we can't band together. There's so much unity on the side of the, the Trump supporter and the Trump voter that we have to do something about it. And then it was really just through, doing the show with Tania and then becoming friends with Tania through doing the show that I really kind of got a little perspective on my own bias, it kind of like got turned inside out a little bit, and just realized, like, okay, I always knew I had a bias, I knew this was there, but a lot of the kind of fundamental foundational assumptions I'd made about myself and my worldview and my racism or non-racism weren't really true. They were kind of, shorthands, an emotional shorthand for myself, and I think we all do those about different aspects of our lives.
Right.
But the race one is so pervasive because it is, this white dominant culture that affords privilege, and we have to be willing, I think, to own up to that and do our part to help dismantle that, not in a way that hurts us, but in a way that brings people in.
And tell me about you. What is your day job? How did have you always been, I'm sure as a black woman, it's been more prevalent for you than for Paul.
Sure. I'm an actress and a writer and a teacher.
Have you always been a black woman?
I've always been a black woman. Since the day I was born. Anyway, so I'm an actress, a writer, a teacher, and a great deal of my content has to do with race. I grew up in an all-white suburb, so I have a sort of very particular perspective on the aspect of race and whiteness, which is one of my favorite words, because whiteness isn't simply color, it is a system, it is a structure that is used to uphold some and suppress others. And so, I had an experience growing up in an all-white suburb where, more or less, it was a fine childhood, right? Like I had friends, I participated in extracurriculars, but things happened. A lot of things happened, but they weren't things I could identify yet as racist. They weren't things that I could sort of speak to in terms of how they were harmful or hurtful to me in my developmental process. A lot of these things I didn't realize till much, much later in my life, and then had to kind of revisit really some very impactful moments in my life that were loaded with race.
That you didn't know about at the time because
I couldn't
you didn't
identify
have anyone to talk to about
I didn't have anybody to talk to about it. I didn't have anybody to advocate for me or defend me. And not that my parents wouldn't have, but I didn't necessarily know
to tell them
what it was to tell them,
Right.
right? So that's an area I'm really exploring in my life right now and writing a lot about because, again, it is so important for children to grow up with people around them who reflect them, right?
And is that why you chose to live in Evanston to raise your kids?
My husband is a native Evanstonian. He went to grade school and high school here, and so I sort of joined him in that. And so I am glad we're here because my daughters are growing up with people who look like them around them, which was not an experience I had, and which I really feel actually is crucial to development.
Right.
So and so I spend a great deal of my time trying to write about and I feel like my mission is to dismantle whiteness so that we can have multiple perspectives, and I really feel strongly about helping people understand where their blind spots are, but doing it in a way that they're able to receive the information and not feel defensive.
So you said you weren't really friends beforehand, you were more colleagues beforehand. Have you become friends?
Yeah. We have, and it's one of those situations, and it's similar to, there's these great improvisers in town, TJ and Dave, and they sort of are veteran, amazing improvisers who have do a 2-person set, and have traveled the world with it and performed together all the time. They're not necessarily, and so they're, in each other's lives quite a bit, but they're not necessarily social in the sense that like they've talked about in interviews where they sort of like show up to the theater, do a quick check-in and go. And they're not like on the phone all the time or going out to dinner or going out to lunch, but there's a respect and a relationship there and a friendship there. And I think one of the things about Race Bait is, Paul and I we're texting constantly just trying to figure out what our next show is going to be and all the details. We aren't sort of like socializing in that sense, but when we come together, we check in a little bit, catch up on our lives, and then we go, and I think that's what provides some of the spontaneous aspect of the show.
Right, you trust each other.
We trust each other,
Yeah,
but our
we do.
friendship has just deepened, and I love Paul, I really do, and I can sort of chart the progression of that, and I have a sort of a deep trust in him in terms of things that I can like throw his way that I might not be able to throw to
Right.
another friend who is white,
Right.
and so we've earned it, and it's a rich thing. It's a very cool thing.
Yeah, I echo all of that, and I think too that I've done it. Certainly, for anyone who listens to our show, it's happened, and it happened last week where I will get into a mindset that is has been and is very common, but like realize the kind of racist perspective within it, like sometimes as I'm saying it, and it's really embarrassing to unpack. And last week we did it about Serena Williams, and
I have not
generosity.
listened to that one yet.
Oh man, it was
Shoot!
It's
Yeah.
a beauty.
I was
It's
a
a
little worried.
beauty.
But the whole thing about it is, we talked about in our show, and you alluded to it at the top, generosity of spirit and honesty. And I think that, Tanya, I think I can feel that you trust me.
Yeah.
So I know that you are, like, this is kind of the example. Like, I think she cuts me slack that I wouldn't have been cut early on because I probably wouldn't have deserved it. And by the same token, I think, even in that one, I was pretty good about taking the note. Not perfect,
Yeah.
but I didn't, even though I was, and we didn't even talk about this after, but there was kind of like this 3-alarm fire raging in my head of like, okay, stop everything. I'm not a racist. Let's clarify it. Let's get some check-in. Let's get okay. Tell me I'm fine, whatever. And I probably did a little bit after the show, but I don't feel the need to do that as much. And I'm finding that carries out into the world too.
Well, Paul gives me a great opportunity to practice in a way because I trust him, and not because, and I don't mean that in the sense like because he's constantly saying things I have to
So many
as a
opportunities.
landmine. It's more that I think I sort of was talking to my husband about this once. I'm like, gosh, Paul and I have developed such a shorthand now, and we have literally like scripted things where, and we talked about it on the show, like if I feel triggered or I'm uncomfortable or I need a minute, like things we've talked about that we've put in place.
Right.
That enable us to have these difficult conversations. And I think we've gotten really, really good at it. And so last week's episode, which is called Serenity Now,
Serenity now.
Serenity Now, thank you, is a perfect example because it was a hot mess, but we are able to go in deep, figure it out, talk about it, get out of it, move on.
Do you ever, two questions, have you ever not aired an episode because of how it turned out?
Just one, but it wasn't about something that happened between us.
Oh,
Yeah.
Right? And it was just a situation where we felt like, I think the person we were speaking with would have liked a do-over. And I think
was
they even
was
ended up.
concerned that there might be ramifications.
Oh, okay.
for
And
some-
that's one of my favorite things. Is like, and actually that's a credit to Paul, because Paul could have easily been like, I want to edit all of that, right? I don't look perfect. I don't look, let me edit. Let's just cut it. But he's very much willing to sort of be imperfect in these conversations, and it enables us to model what we're talking about, which is how to have these conversations with kindness, humor, and just generosity of spirit. And so,
Yeah, I think that's super well said. And I wanted to say one thing too about the friendship thing is, the world we live in now, our work friends, for all of us, I think our work friends and colleagues become such an integral part of our lives because we spend so much time doing that, and it's so much of the focus of our energy and our thought. And I think for people who are kind of artists and are kind of choosing to do this on our own, so we're kind of like business partners,
Right.
but also artists, and also, there's kind of an emotional trust that has to happen. Like for actors, you get pretty good at getting into it quickly because you have to have that on stage or you can't work. So, I mean, in a ways, it's funny. I mean, I feel like we're like an old married couple in some ways too. Like, it's really great because I feel like, you know, it hasn't expanded much beyond that because we're busy people with busy lives. And I live in Wilmette. We don't really like to have people
Cross the border.
But I had to do something. So I think that that's all really true. I mean, I think
have you ever, I mean, not broadcast or published one of your podcasts, but have you ever walked away from one angry at each other?
No, and I think it's because we have figured out how to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think we're sort of operating now at a level where we have actually figured out how to have difficult conversations around race with kindness, generosity, and spirit, and we move on. And sometimes I'm like, I hope the listeners, you know, the listeners are experiencing that in real time, and they may not be able to recover as quickly as we do. But the goal is, folks, that if we're going to do this, we can't spend time in our wounds, right? And so that's kind of, no. I mean, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work if I was harboring something. And it wouldn't work, again, with the example of last week's episode, if I had felt triggered about some of the things Paul said and I just decided not to address it. Because then I would have been holding on to that.
Well, one of the things that I notice in when I listen is that you often examine your emotions and your responses and your reactions, and then you express them to each other.
Yeah.
And I mean, in normal life, you know, I think marriages could be saved by that.
All manner of relationships.
You know, right. And I think that that's really interesting because instead of just closing up and just moving on and kind of ignoring it or whatever, you really do examine it out loud for people to hear. And I think that's why you kind of role model the conversation.
Well, thanks for saying that. I mean, I think we really try, and I think that's kind of where we are such a good match too. It's kind of a perfect storm because both of us, through our background, again, as actors in our training, are used to accessing and sharing those emotional places. It's kind of like what we have to do. You know, there's a certain emotional courage that just kind of comes with the territory. I think because Tania has done so much work and so much thought on this subject, and is such an articulate and thoughtful, intelligent woman. You know, she's a great person to talk about it. I think what I bring to it in a lot of ways, and I've talked about this on the show before, and I think it kind of fits to what we were talking about, is I'm someone who, I'm like 6 years, and I've been sober for 6 years, and I'm in recovery, and that's something that's really kind of an ongoing thing in my personal life. But the correlation, like if I had not gotten sober, I would not have been able to do this show. Like if I hadn't done the work that comes with having to basically look at yourself, unpack it, and say, okay, here's all the shit that I did, and here's why I thought I did it, and here's why I was wrong, and I'm gonna now not kill myself or keep, pounding myself into the ground. I'm gonna forgive myself and everybody else, and then I'm gonna, live my life. And I feel like that is really at the root of these discussions. You know, sometimes we talk about it as, this American black and white racism. It's like America's fever dream. We've been in this fever dream for hundreds of years in this country, and we use the term woke. In some ways, I think it's the right one. It's like the fever breaks, you're filled with sweat, you don't feel really good, but it's like you see things suddenly. Clarity has come back, and I think that those discussions, it's like ongoing therapy, I mean, it's or recovery or anything else. You have to talk about it, and when these things come up, you're either going to find a way to healthfully, shape them and let them go, or use them, or you're going to bring them back on yourself or other people.
And the thing is that that's where the state of paralysis happens, is people stay frozen in their emotion, and it's like they have the emotional response. They don't want to take a look inward. They want to cast everything outward and blame and defend, and that's why it's so, we're very aware that our audience is, there's a degree of it where we are preaching to the choir, but in the sense that these are people largely, I think,
who are attracted to
who
the
want
podcast.
to be allies, who want to be in these conversations, but the blind spot is that state of paralysis that happens because nobody wants to feel wrong, nobody wants to admit difficult things, and so that's what we keep pushing through on Race Babe, is how to get past that state of paralysis.
And who is your audience? Do you know? Do you know who listens, who downloads, how many people, what kind of people? Are they black? Are they white?
Right. I think that, we don't have like a huge knowledge of our demographic, we have participation on our Facebook page, and so we're able to see those folks. And I think I have gotten feedback from people who are Black and who are white, and I feel like, you know, what appeals to them is if it's a Black person listening, I sort of feel sometimes like I am able to say things for them that they wish they could say in their everyday lives, you know?
In their interactions with me.
No, on topics, on everything, you know? Like I'm able to voice some of those things that they either don't have the opportunity to or are happy to know that it's being said, knowing that other people are hearing it as well.
And to give them language.
Exactly, and hopefully that as well. And then I think that I know that a lot of our listeners are white who are, you know, wanting to be a part of the fight and are quite humble in the sense that they want this modeling. They want what we are trying to do with each other as well as our perspectives on it.
Yeah, I think so. And I think probably, I mean, again, it would be anecdotal, not statistic. You can't tell, or statistical evidence, you can't tell how many downloads you get on iTunes,
Right.
You know, on Podbean, it's, you know, usually between 150 and 200, I think, of each
Yeah.
episode. But I think people can stream it without downloading it, so we really
Don't
don't
know.
have a sense. You know, the interesting thing to me is people that I don't expect to, that I never knew listened to it, who will come up to me and say, oh my gosh, I listen to this when I'm working out, I listen to it in laundry, and they'll always ask how you're doing. They'll be like, how's Tanya? I feel like I know her. And, you know, yeah, it's really sweet. It's super sweet. And I think it's, but I do think it's disproportionately kind of probably white, educated, middle-aged, upper middle class type of people. And I think that that's where we live, in Evanston and in Wilmette, and that's, I think, the people that are naturally, like, I don't really know, and I will say I'm a little self-conscious sometimes of, like, because I have a fair amount of Black friends from, you know, my high school is predominantly Black, and I hang out with them more probably on Facebook, if I'm quite honest, than I did in high school, and yet I always, like, wish and expect and hope there'll be more buy-in from them or more response to the show, and I don't know sometimes, I guess maybe it's my own paranoia, is like, you know, this is a lived experience for our African American friends, and so, like, do they really need to sit and consider this? I mean, this is a show that white people need. I don't know if Black people need it to the same degree because they're steeped in it.
I struggle with that. I struggle with it. And again, there is this big mystery of we literally don't know. I think that, you know, for Black listeners, or if somebody watching this is interested, I hope that I am able to not represent in the sense that I'm speaking for everybody, but it's the intention isn't to sort of kowtow or cater to a white audience. You know, this podcast is for everybody, and we go deep and we go hard and we talk about things and we are speaking truth. We're not making this easy for people, and I am coming from this as a Black woman who is responding in real time to the events happening around us, and if somebody is wanting to listen, a person of color, in order to have their feelings reflected or magnified, you know, this is for them as well. So again, I have gotten feedback from people of color who are listening, and you know, I try not to get too, like, self-conscious either, you know, but it doesn't devalue it if it's a largely white audience, but it is an inclusive show, you know, and it isn't set up in a way to sort of be pleasing for a white audience.
No, we don't cater to it at all, but I also feel like we know who might benefit, you know, as well, because, you know, we try not to bring, I always say that, and then it's like my segue into bringing politics into it. Like, I don't want to make this explicitly political, but of course the Trump election and a lot of the conservative politics in this country are what we're fighting against in a lot of ways. You know, this kind of fundamental denial that such a thing as systemic racism exists, and blaming, you know, Black people for the shooting deaths here in Evanston and everywhere else, and, you know, and not to take individual accountability from any situation, but a real unfair and kind of built-in racial bias that they refuse to acknowledge. So I think we kind of I feel like, I don't know that we're going to reach those people. You know, we're 2 years into the Trump administration now. Right now, we've got this stuff happening with, you know, children being ripped from their families on the border. I'm not sure that anybody on that side is listening or wants to listen. I do think that, like, you know, there's that kind of white ally part that needs to figure out and needs to be taught, quite honestly, how to have these conversations. I mean, we talk about, you know, white girl tears on the show, which I didn't know about till I did it. This phenomenon of, like, oh, you know, we're going to do a racial equity seminar at work, and, you know, there's 2 Black people and 12 white people, and then, you know, this white girl is crying because she's not a racist and a bad person, and that derails everything that's going on, and we can't do the work that needs to be there. But I think, to the earlier point, it's so pernicious, and it's so hard not to do that, because you were talking about, the emotions that drive it and all of that. I mean, I think, I've read this psychiatrist I love, Jonathan Haidt, and he talks about how, we make all of our moral and ethical decisions emotionally and precognitively. And so that reason and rational thought is only used as a post hoc process to justify, rationalize, interpret, defend our feelings. So if someone questions a thought that I have about racism, even if it isn't about me personally, but it's about my view of race and my view of Serena Williams versus, Maria Sharapova or whatever it might be, if they point out the fallacy of my thinking, it feels like, and I read it as an emotional attack on my being, because that's what it is kind of holding. Do you know what I mean? I mean, that's kind of a tricky thing to say, but like, there is a harder thing for white folks in these discussions, because we do have to, like, own a lot more. And we have to be able to get through a lot of these paradigms that we think are just, the way it is, and truth, justice, and the American way. We have to learn on a case-by-case basis that, that ain't the way it is necessarily.
And as we're saying more and more on the show, racism won't end if white people aren't involved.
Oh,
it's not a black problem, it's a white problem, and it's
right.
And so for that reason, again, it's about throwing these conversations, and then I'm hopefully always trying to sort of put a perspective that the blind spot doesn't allow for, right? And so that it enables people to think about things in a way that might not or could not have occurred to them, hopefully as well.
Well, I also think the people that want to deny systemic racism, the fact that we can't organically have these conversations and kind of know where each other is coming from is used to divide us all the time, because black people will talk more about racism and oppression and being subject to this, because as white people, even as allies, I can leave, we talk about that all the time. I don't have to go out in the world and experience racism. You know what I mean? I can choose to be engaged with race on a day or not, and I can do it on an hour by hour basis. Black people don't have that luxury, so when people on the right will want to say, or well, black people are this or whining or the victim of the crime in Chicago or whatever, there's a certain amount of like defending that happens, but there's also a certain separation. Well, I know there's some of whatever, you know what I mean? And it's really a way for them to kind of call to, I think, this undercurrent of whiteness that liberals have. And a lot of people go even as far as saying, oh, you're a white apologist, you have white guilt, you're betraying,
questions.
Yeah, I mean, a Nazi or a nationalist would say you're betraying your race, but even people that are very middle of the road would say, oh, you're just a wishy-washy white guilt guy.
Right, or you think too much about it, just, Seriously, I do think that that's definitely the case. One of my questions was going to be, do you ever get that from people, it's such a waste of time, so, but one of the...
No, well, go ahead, yeah.
No,
well, I was just going to say, sometimes I get, sometimes it can feel daunting in terms of like how, I have someone who's close to me who is black, who's like, it's not going to change. Right? And so that's sort of the flip side of that, not so much to like, oh, you're sweet, like where might be something Paul might hear, but there are people who really feel, people of color who is like, this isn't going to change, so I'm circling my wagons and I'm protecting myself. And sometimes I feel like that too, but I keep going back in.
In the current climate, we have two issues that are going on in this current climate to do with race and politics. And the one is that we have liberal progressive people on the one hand and sort of ultra right wing on the other. And we can't cross that bridge and we can't have those conversations. And last night I went to ETHS and Zach Williams, who's this guy who wrote a book called Uncensored, talks about uncomfortable conversations. But his uncomfortable conversations are bringing in sort of really conservative, potentially, and I don't know all the people he brings in, but racists and people who really aren't in the mainstream, who he feels really need to be heard on liberal arts campuses, because those are the voices that are not heard on liberal arts campuses. And so he thinks that there should be these uncomfortable conversations with them. In the meantime, we have progressives and liberals, and we ourselves attack each other when we are trying to have uncomfortable conversations. A white person or an ally is trying to do the work and well-meaning from a place of goodness. Maybe they're not doing it right. There will be people within this progressive, black people or white people will criticize it and say, well, you're not doing enough. Or, oh, so you've got a BLM sign in your yard, but what does that mean? But the person who's got the Black Lives Matter sign out is trying to start on the journey.
Some of the most racist people I've ever met are the people with Black Lives Matter signs on their lungs. Some of the most problematic white people. Really? And so that is really important.
Yes, please, tell us more,
Yeah.
Tania.
Because they haven't examined their bias. They haven't done any internal work. And so they're taking the shortcuts. I'm going to put a sign on my lawn, but then I'm going to make sweeping assumptions, generalizations, have my blind spot and feel really comfortable with it.
Because I have the sign out.
Because I have the sign out and because I have privilege and I can, right? And so one of the biggest battles right now, which is why I think these types of conversations are so important, are people who think they are allies, but don't understand that being an ally is thorny and difficult, and you have to constantly regenerate yourself, and you have to constantly check back in and take the note from other people who are being critical. And it's like, get over it.
So, yes, no,
Sign me up, please. What can I?
I totally get it.
Because there is no time. There's no time. There's no time if I have called you out on something to take care of you. I am moving on.
That's the difference between season 2 and season 1. I can't wait to see what season 3 might look like.
What I'm saying is, when do you give a person, not the benefit of the doubt, but engage that person who has that person who has a Black Lives Matter sign out there, I'm sure there are people who really are allies who have that out, and I think you're absolutely right that it's a shortcut.
Yes.
I totally see
And
that.
please, anybody who does and knows they're in the work and fighting the good fight, that's not my point. I know a particular person who has that sign and has said some of the most problematic things to me I've ever heard.
Will that person engage with you?
Oh God, no, because I won't. I'm not interested in engaging with them anymore. They've shown me who they are. Right? Their words don't matter, because when I have spoken to them, when I have had concerns and expressed them, they can't even begin to wrap their brains around it, and also have no curiosity about it. I mean, I guess if they had curiosity, I might engage.
Right. I think when somebody shows curiosity and the intention, their intention, that's easier to engage in. I think that you're right. There's probably many times when you just go.
Well, and you have to, and that's the part of the self-care as a Black person. I'm not being cruel when I am done. Like, I have a sort of like thing on Facebook or whatever it is, where I will engage, and if somebody has I get messages frequently where people are like, can I check in with you on this? I am so happy to give my perspective and really appreciate them reaching out, because it takes courage. I'm talking about white people who reach out. Great. On Facebook, if I get involved in a back and forth with somebody who is seeking clarity, I am happy to engage, but there is a point where I set my own boundary. And it usually happens whether it's like maybe like the lifespan of it is like 2 or 3 back and forths, where I am willing to go a little deeper and clarify a little bit more. But when we get to the point of now the person requesting feedback is just continues to reframe the question in order for me to co-sign their initial belief. That's when I hop off. And I hop off not to be cruel, I hop off because I need to emotionally take care of myself.
Well, let me talk about, we created this gauge on the show called the Raceometer. And basically we talk about, on a scale of, 1 to 10, with 1 being not triggered and okay, and 10 being absolutely triggered emotionally, like feeling the weight, feeling the pressure, heart palpitations, all that kind of thing, that as white people, we need to spot Black people at least like 3 to 7 or 8 points all the time. Like, if
I live at about 4, no question.
Like, there's like maybe at home or like Christmas morning you get below that. I mean, is there like, honestly though, if you're outside of the house, do you think you're at a 4 usually? If you're like out in the world,
I'm
talking
never
to people.
below a 4 if I'm out in the world.
Oh yeah.
And I don't even know if I'm below a 4 at home because I have access to like the internet
Right.
and I'm in a biracial home. So
Yeah.
I sort of live at 4.
Yeah, and there is, I think, for everyone, this kind of gets back to your earlier point, which I think we have to be aware of, a psychological, emotional, physiological weight that I think people that have been, oppressed and not heard and, for so long, experience on an individual level. The most insensitive thing that, I hear from white people, well, I don't know if that's true, an insensitive thing, that I may have been guilty of when I was a teenager and thinking I was rational and reasonable and using, these rational powers is like, but you weren't a slave, you weren't this, you weren't that. I mean, it's like you want to dismiss the reality of like, guess what? People have post-traumatic stress
talked
disorder.
about it long enough, like move on.
Yeah.
Right, and you
Yeah.
know what? Like I would imagine it's crucial for white people to realize that if I am like, if I'm saying, oh, I want to find out about this and I'm going to make a little thing here, like I'm going to go, okay, I'm going to dip my toe in and I'm going to ask Tanya because I know she's smart and whatever, and I'm going to let myself go from 1, maybe to 3, because I really want to get there on the raceometer, and she's starting at 4, and by saying this to her and forcing her to engage in this, I'm going to put her to 8 or 9.
Yeah.
And then
Which I'm willing to do.
which she's willing to do.
But I'm
then,
only willing to sustain for so long.
Right, but then again, that's it. I mean, it's like, it sounds kind of like, when you say it in a way, you could, oh, this is harsh. Well, I'm not going any further. I don't have time for you. I'm not going to do this. But you know what? That's exactly the reality, because there is always an emotional differential that is at play there. And that's I think the biggest takeaway for me that I've had to learn is like, look, I have to respect people. I wouldn't, want to go to someone who's, I don't know, I don't have a good analogy, but just like we're not coming from the same place ever. And if the place that I'm going to as a white person that I want to be rewarded for is 2 points below her default, then, my head is up my ass. Whatever my intentions are, my head is up my ass.
Well, and the other thing is, one of my favorite sayings is questions are statements in disguise. And that's a really...
What do you mean by that?
That's one thing you could really check yourself. Quick check yourself.
Yeah.
Is this an actual question or is it a statement in disguise that I'm looking for validation for? And that's where, after a few back and forths, the questions become statements in disguise.
Yes.
And that's when I can say, we're done.
Yes, but don't you think...
Yeah, right? And let me reframe it this way with a question mark, even though it's really subtextually what I feel and I refuse to let go of.
Right.
Well, I think that what's really hard for white people, it's scary to ask questions of a black person, say, in case you're going to offend them without meaning to, where some people will say, well, I don't have to explain that to you. I don't want to talk about that, which I really understand.
Yeah.
But what I respect about this is that you actually do it.
So, we do. It's about the courage. It's about the willingness to be wrong. Part of the self-protection that happens is, as a white person, they don't want to ask because they don't want to look stupid. They don't want to accidentally reveal that they have bias, right? Guess what? We already know you have bias. That's going to be your discovery, not ours. So take that risk and then be willing to be wrong, have some egg on your face, feel criticized, whatever it is.
Right.
But that is the work, because otherwise you're constantly in self-protection mode and no truth can come out. But I think that there's such a desire to be taken care of in these conversations. And yes, to be respected, not to be sort of, but you know what? You got to find your people in the world who are willing to do that with you. And, that takes risk, that takes the unknowing, and that takes the willingness to be wrong. And it takes your own willingness to find out on your own, as we many times say, Google.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
There is something written about everything.
Right.
Do you know?
Right. And
Even if it feels like I can only get this from an individual, something's been written about it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, and I think we can acknowledge too that, like, even though it's, I say, oh, I'm only going to go 3 and Tanya's going to be at a 9, like that's what's happening. Once you get into it emotionally with another person, then kind of the raceometer goes away as I think our individual humanity starts to rise, and then I can be just as triggered as Tanya, but like that's when I lose track of, well, you're the one that asked this question, or you're the one that's pushing this, or you're the one that's here. Do you know what I mean? Like, you like, as human beings, I think we all draw from the same emotional palette. So at a certain point of an argument, it's not fair to say, well, I feel this more strongly than you, to trump someone, because we get all agitated up there. But I think it's like, how did you get there? Are you willing to come down from there? And are you willing to see the handicap that this person that you're talking to has in this discussion, or that you have, maybe more importantly, that you don't see? And actually, I was thinking when you said that, just really quickly, the question, statements to the side, again, to go back to Jonathan Haidt, here's a really simple tool, I think, for white people, or in any situation, to know to check yourself. He says that because we have this implicit bias that comes immediately, and then we use our logic to defend it, even before we're thinking about something, that if we emotionally want to believe something, if we emotionally want to preserve a sense of something about ourselves, we will say, and someone says something to us that we don't like, I'll say subconsciously, must I believe that? Mm-hmm. So if Tania's position is, well, you're not doing this and this, and I say, must I believe that? Then I can pull from any factoid in the universe, internal or external, to say, well, that's not true, so therefore I don't have to believe that. Do you know what I mean? But if you were to flip it around and you don't want to believe what she has to say, or you do want to believe something, like I want to believe what she has to say, then the question I'm going to ask myself is, can I believe this? So I can pick 2 or 3 things to say, yes, I'm with you, I agree, we're simpatico, right? And that's just my brain playing a trick on me to let my emotion win out whatever it was automatically. So if you're in a position where you're having this discussion and Tania's saying something, to you, as she probably will at some point if you live in Evanston, but if you're having this discussion where it feels like you're being attacked or whatever, and I think, just think of that as like, you're thinking, must I believe this, is where we have these discussions from. What if you flip it? And just listen openly and say, can I believe this?
Mm-hmm. Can I consider this?
Can I consider this?
It's almost like time for white people, way past time, for white people to listen.
What?
It's listen.
To listen for understanding and not validation. And do your own work and realize, the question's already answered. You have bias, you have privilege, right?
You are racist, you are privileged, you are fragile.
You have racist tendencies. So if you already just agree to those, or do whatever work you need to do to agree to those, then you can have those conversations. And the truth is, if you can't agree to those, then you can't have those conversations.
Yeah, it's almost the price of entry to any constructive conversation. I mean, yeah, exactly.
That's a really good point. I have another question for you, which I know that you your parents were Haitian.
Yes.
Were Haitian.
Yes.
And you were born here.
Mm-hmm.
So do you feel differently as a Haitian American versus an African American? Do you identify yourself as both, because you are kind of both? You live here.
No,
but you're not an African American.
I don't identify.
Haitian American.
No, my ethnicity is Haitian American, right. And it is a whole other ball of wax. And I've never identified as African American because it's a different ethnicity, and right. It has different culture and history, and that's why I don't identify even in box. I put other.
Right.
And it has nothing to do with this idea of I don't want to be associated with, but it's just it's different, and I have had a different experience, and there are times when sort of the jokes that go on between friends about certain things about African American culture that I don't relate to, just because it's very, very different. And so I feel like that speaks so much to understanding the multiple perspectives. And the assumption is that I'm African American, right. And it is an assumption, and it is something put on me. And so I make it very sort of part of my mission to be clear about that, and to be clear about the reason, because it's just like a whole other world being Asian American in terms of traditions, food. Yes, are there some similarities? Sure, but I so honor African American culture in the sense that there are things about it that I don't know and don't presume to know simply because I have black skin. Right, and ignores the diverse richness of being a black person in this country.
I have that same problem because my parents are from Ireland, and I'm first generation just like Tania, and I grew up in Indiana. So people look at me and they think Hoosier.
Yeah, I have friends
That's good, yeah.
from Trinidad and Jamaica, and they say that it's who actually grew up there,
Yeah.
and then came to live here. And they say it's really hard because you kind of don't fit in. They come and they don't fit into the black community, and they don't because they're not African American, and then they don't fit in the white community because they're black.
See, but I think that for me, growing up, that was the thing. So, growing up in an all-white environment, and then when I started to have opportunity to be around black people, African American, I did not initially feel like I belonged because I was really quite different, and the things that I understood or my experiences growing up weren't similar to theirs. So there definitely was a period of time where I felt like an outsider, even within my own assumed culture, which would be African American.
Right.
And I think the thing, but as I became more comfortable and owned the fact that like this is my background, and not trying necessarily to quote unquote fit in, right? But just to present and be proud of who I am. I don't feel that anymore. I don't feel like an outsider of the African American community. And in that sense, I feel like I'm a part of a whole, you know?
Right.
And that my diversity as far as that goes is welcome, you know?
Yeah.
But that came a lot, not necessarily from them. It was never about them as much as it was about me.
Thank you for staying with us, America. Evanston.
One of the questions that I wanted to ask you was, we can talk and talk and talk and have courageous conversations, have all kinds of conversations, but at some point we've got to act. And I'm wondering what you guys do off mic, if you are involved in activism, if you know, what kinds of things do you do beyond the conversation, which conversation obviously is critical, we cannot have enough of it. Then what's the next step? And I'm interested to know what you guys do.
I feel like, and it's a great question because I feel like everybody has to answer to themselves, like, what is the activism in me and how does it manifest? And for me, my activism is largely through my writing. So I have a blog, and I also create different types of content. So I should just say it, I'm writing something called Black Girl in a White Suburb, which is my experiences about growing up in an all-white environment, and I publish them in segments on my blog, and then I'm also releasing them on SoundCloud, the audio versions. And so between that and my blog, I actually do quite a bit of work with equity and inclusion professionally. I actually work in corporate systems and with different theaters on inclusion. But so that I know is my activism.
Right.
And I'm realizing as more shit hits the fan, that sometimes I need to step outside sort of my wheelhouse in the sense that, like, with everything that has happened at the border, like, I'm ready to hit the pavement in a way that I normally don't, just because I'm an introvert and I don't like crowds, right? But I always try to remind myself as I see what other people are doing, like, my keyboard and pen are my swords, this podcast, and then the other thing that I try to do on a regular basis is my activism is interrupt whiteness. So it's like when you see something, say something, right? And don't just wait for the podcast, but to, as much as I can, practice it in my own life.
And as you probably noticed, I'm very hard to interrupt, so it's a good opportunity for her here. It was funny what you were saying. I was going to sit there saying, joke about
you've been very active. You were very much activist, externally.
I am, and I didn't even think about it, because when you said it first, I thought, I'm not doing anything else at all, because a lot of the work that I've done in terms of activism is stuff that I have done, but I haven't done for a while. Like, I was very involved with Interfaith Action of Evanston, which, if your followers don't know about it, is a great organization with so many opportunities to do direct services and personal interactions for the homeless and the hungry, the chronically hungry in Evanston. So it's not exactly a long race, but it is yet another example, and perhaps a very clear example, of where systemic racism, has an even more powerful and more, damaging effect to those that are most vulnerable among us, by seeing the people that are out on the streets and all of that. But yeah, I kind of have become an activist. I've always had a big mouth, and I've always been willing to kind of say what I.
Hello, tip of the spear.
Yeah,
well, that's what I was going to say. So I know.
Oh yeah, that.
I forgot about that. So yeah, I made it last year.
To tip of the spear.
Yeah, you referenced at the beginning this racial controversy in New Trier last year happened right after we started, And so I made this documentary kind of on accident called Tip of the Spear, which ended up getting a lot of attention on the North Shore, and we got some coverage in the Trib, and it was interesting. I think it made a difference in a local election, so that was really great, felt great. Right now I am raising money and in production on a follow-up documentary, which is currently called Dark Age, The Big Money Attack on Public Education, and it's looking largely at the kind of libertarian think tank industry that's kind of been created to kind of push this destroy government narrative, but it's through the lens of public education. And again, you could say I'm just looking for it. It amazes me how much race plays into it. Because what our kind of working theory is that resegregation is happening as a result, a direct result of this attack on the public school system, even though it's invariably presented every time it starts in every state that it started in as a way to help poor minority children of color. And then it's not really that. So anyway, that's what I do.
You guys keep yourselves unbelievably busy. I mean, the fact that you do all this and then you sit down. Do you do this once a week?
We try to stay bi-weekly.
Yeah. It's, I think, pretty integral to who we sort of are in the sense of like wanting to do it and making the space for it. And we try as much as possible to continue to reassess and make sure that we're both fully invested and able due to our schedules and stuff. But it feels for me, although it takes that time, it's time that I want to spend and time well spent. So
yeah. Well, and I can also say something that might sound cheesy or self-serving or whatever, but it's not. I don't think at all. I think it's really true. I think perhaps, and I've alluded to it, the best thing about this show for me, the most activism that it's kind of led me to, is how I live my life. Right. Like I see the world differently because of my friendship with Tania, because of this show, because of the way we do things. And just all of the places that I interact with people of color when I watch television and I see the lack of representation, I used to think, well, yes, people should be able to tell their own stories, but we can tell white stories too. And I see it differently now, So I think that kind of inside job is the important thing. I don't know how much of a difference I'll ever make, but I think I'm making a difference for myself, and as a father, I hope I'm making a difference for my kids.
Well, it's almost the charity begins at home. It's kind of activism begins at home. So if you're actively changing and learning and growing, then you are going to impact other people by your very own active learning and growing. So
absolutely.
And I do think that everybody has their own way to be an activist. You don't have to be on the front lines.
Right.
Anything you contribute is valuable.
Yeah.
As long as you contribute.
Yeah.
So I was speaking to a group of kids from ETHS at YOU yesterday. And it was a group of African American kids and a couple of Latinx kids. And one of the girls, who was Latinx, told me, they all put little questions in a bucket and then I was going to answer them. And her story was that there was a teacher at ETHS. She decided she was going to have an Indian day. So Indian culture, blah, blah. And this girl's sister said to the teacher, can't do that, that's cultural appropriation. And the teacher got really angry, and they had some kind of an argument, and the student wrote on a piece of paper something like, I hate white people. And the teacher got furious and called on the social workers and sent the kid to a social worker and sent the kid to a dean. And then this girl's sister, who's the one who put the note in, went to the teacher and said, why are you doing this to my sister? Why is it such a big deal? And the teacher got even more irate and ended up sending her to a social worker and sending her to a dean and calling her parents.
Wow.
And she said to me, her question was, what can other people, especially people in positions of authority, have done with this teacher? So I'm curious to hear what you guys think about that situation.
Was this teacher white?
Yes, this teacher was white.
This is great. I would love to jump in.
I was just going to say, ooh, sorry about Indian Day, but it's a sorry joke. So.
Oh my God, what's wrong with you?
Thanks, everybody. Go ahead.
Okay, so this is kind of something that has sprouted up occasionally in terms of white teachers making choices around other cultures that they do not have the license to make. Let me repeat that. They do not have the license to make those calls, right? So if you randomly want to have an Indian Day, what does that mean? So are we talking Native American?
No, it was Indian from India.
Indian from India, but she is not Indian.
No.
So if she wants to do due diligence, if she wants to like vet every single thing she's going to do to make sure that it is culturally sound, that she has experts coming in from the area, that she has run that past somebody who can tell her what is best and what would be possibly considered offensive. If she wants to make sure that kids in the classroom who might come from that culture have a big voice
In
in
fact,
what's
I
happening.
have to interrupt you because I've actually misspoke, and I think the person who said that you shouldn't do that, it's cultural appropriation, was an Indian guy.
Oh, for God's
It wasn't this girl, and then this girl followed up. So I think it came from an Indian kid. who said
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a great example of what I don't even want to call anymore good intentions gone wrong, right? So whether that's a good intention or not, it's just that once you make a move like that and you get feedback from anybody, especially if they're within the freaking culture that you're talking about, stand down. What are you fighting about?
What I thought was so strange about the teacher's response was punitive, rather than saying, I mean, if somebody writes on a piece of paper, I hate white people, where's the teacher to talk about that? Did something happen, you know, in addition to what I've just done, but what's this about?
That's 100% the defense and state of paralysis that comes and not able to move past the quote-unquote hurt. But this isn't like isolated. I hear about things like this white teacher, for instance, the school that took kids on their 5th grade field trip when you go sort of, like Camp Timberley in Evanston. There's another school, this was in the paper, they took the kids on a field trip, a lot of black kids in this mix, and they did a mock Underground Railroad. They didn't tell the parents they were doing this. They had kids, some of the kids were, charged with, what are they called? I don't know, the people trying to find the slaves. Some of the kids were the slaves, and they're doing this whole reenactment of the Underground Railroad. And this is largely the people running it are white. They can't reach their parents, they don't have access to any technology, and they're literally out of town with these people, forcing them to do a reenactment of the Underground Railroad. Nobody, and there were black people apparently on staff who co-signed this idea, but that doesn't mean it's right. But so something like that happens, and then they're like, what? When kids come back to their parents traumatized. There's a teacher, who was for 10 years using the N-word in his classroom during one particular assignment, who thought, I'm gonna use the N-word and it's gonna be a way to sort of gain some sort of agency with my students. Meanwhile, a student was offended and now this teacher has been suspended. Right. But it's like for 10 years he got away with it and everybody knew, but it's finally a student had to call it out, right? Teachers who decide, students shouldn't put N asterisk, 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 asterisk to represent the N-word. They should write it out every single time. This is a white teacher telling their largely white classroom that they should be doing it.
What?
Stop it, people, stop it.
Well, and this is I think a real difficult part of all of this, and it's a part where we have to kind of own our moment in history, I think, because as plain devil's advocate, I could say that if I'm a teacher, not the N-word teacher, but like the Indian teacher, I don't know what that meant. I don't know what that looked like. I can understand that if the kid's offended, you should go with that immediately. And yet I could see how we want to explore these cultures. We'll do this. Maybe we could try this. It could come from a place that wasn't overtly biased or consciously biased or racist at all. And again, so with this good intention, then to have that interpreted, this person's going to feel attacked. I'm not a teacher, but I feel like, if you're in front of a group of kids that you have relationships with, that some are good and some are bad, and you're there every day all the time and they're 5th graders, you know what I mean? There's a lot of other ometers other than the race-ometer, there's these damn kids-ometer, there's all kinds of things. So in a way, it probably is right and okay on a personal, individual level that, this woman should be cut some slack for a bad choice she made. Not the way she handled it, but the bad choice she made. And yet,
Right.
I think where hopefully this circles back so you can co-sign on my bullshit, is that we live in a time in our moment in history where, you said that, like, oh, it's harder to be a white man right now. And I always say, no, it's not really, because the stuff's still there. But it is hard in that if we want to make this stuff happen, we have to accept the kinds of things that Tania said. If we are white people that are in this system, whatever our intentions were, whatever we wanted to do, whatever we thought we were doing, whatever we feel is a fair emotional assessment or not, you got to take one for the team.
And it's about relinquishing control, because white people have had control for so long that admitting their a mistake or taking the note feels like releasing some of that control. But it's just making room. Right?
So even if the person who is white was not wrong, or even if the request from the person of color is wrong, and I think usually it's not, if you take the time to unpack it and learn about it, the result is probably still the same, right? It's like you have to step aside and
choose your battles. And suddenly for her, it seems as if the most important thing in the world is to have Indian Day, because she has been told she did something wrong. Whereas she really thought about it, she could easily move on from that idea and find another.
I totally agree. I think that it's her decision to have Indian Day may be wrong, misguided, stupid, insensitive, etc.
Yeah, and again, I would agree. It doesn't necessarily have to be any of those things. It's just like, okay.
But somebody said it was, and then somebody else had a reaction to it, and instead of taking a few steps back and talking about it, it suddenly became this punishment of the kid.
Yeah, and
so I found that.
Yeah, as opposed to being an opportunity to learn and be like, well, how could we make this happen where it would feel inclusive, right? And then suddenly, who knows what
it
that
wasn't
kid would
a
bring to the
conversation.
table.
It wasn't a conversation. It was
a shutdown.
And again, I think this is a situation where it would be very easy because of the structure to say, well, this is a bad apple, this teacher's insensitive, she shouldn't have done that, but don't blame all white people when they have these intentions. Again, this is where systemic racism lives. You have to be ruthless about, no, you can't make an apology for this one person, because it's not like, oh, well, white people aren't really terrorists, it's just those couple of boys that shoot up all the schools, I mean, this has to go both ways. And right now, in this moment in history, I think it's incumbent on those of us who want to be allies to be willing to give up these reins.
Yes.
Especially because we're probably still in a position of power, like this teacher was, when we're confronted with it. You know?
Totally.
I wanted to ask you, what you feel like was one of your most powerful podcasts, where you learned the most, or you were the most offended.
Go ahead.
I mean, there have been a lot that I've learned a ton. There have been guests that have learned a lot of things from me. I have to say that maybe just because it's fresh in mind, the last one we just did, Serenity Now, was very, very powerful for me, because it was the one I was probably the least comfortable about being put out there. It was the one I got done with, and I felt really unsettled, and I didn't want to have it out there. And it's one of the ones that when I listened to it, I felt like, boy, this is really delivering on our brand promise,
It's similar in the sense that I have a lot of episodes that I love, and we just really run the gamut. I think I really love an episode where we talk about Philando Castile, and it gets us into a conversation, and for me, I've considered a breakthrough episode, and it has a similar result to the Serenity Now episode, where Paul and I have an opportunity to laugh till we cry based on something that happens in the moment. I feel like that's the episode that really deepened our relationship, but it was just an issue. In that case, it wasn't a misstep. It was Paul trying to make me feel better about how deeply upset I was about Philando Castile. And in that effort, mistakenly saying something that just was not going to make it any better. But it was so funny.
I find that hard to believe.
But it's a heartbreaking one, really, because it's about, we have audio from Philando Castile's mother after the person is not charged, essentially. I think that's what was the basis of it. And anyway, it's an episode which I think is just so deep in humanity, and us really practicing humanity in a way that I just love. And it's similar in the sense of us just dying laughing like we do in the Serenity Now episode. So it's that mix of there is humor. It's one of our deliverables, kindness, generosity, spirit, and humor, and that certainly has as it in that way.
Maybe what I'll do is, who learns more from your podcast?
Tanya, I'm very
or
smart.
Tanya. Right.
I think I do. I mean, I think I do.
You know what I'm learning more and more is how to do this in my life. Because I have talked about that sometimes when you're in the midst of experiencing a microaggression, you go into shock. And I have a tendency, or have had tendencies in the past in my life, to then overcompensate and laugh it away, or pretend like it didn't happen, pretend I didn't hear it, then practice later what I wished I would have said. And I'm developing this muscle now, and I'm seeing it, and I'm not saying like,
And you're saying it's because of all the microaggressions then?
but it's because whether it's a guest we have on, or something that's happened between us, or me just trying to practice what I preach, it's strengthening that muscle, and now it is showing up more regularly in real time, in the field, in my life. Thank God, because I'm so tired with overcompensating for people's nonsense, you know?
I think it's great. So it sounds to me like the short answer is I have learned the most from Tanya without question, and she has learned a lot about herself through her own intelligence and emotional journey, independent of my presence on the show.
No, it's because of
interesting.
you.
I mean,
and
it's
allowing
interesting.
for the space for it to happen. It's the workout. So it's like just keeping that muscle strong.
I think it's awesome. I'm so glad that I finally talked to you
We're
guys.
thrilled.
Yeah.
July 16th, Monday, 7 p.m. Steppenwolf Theater. Tickets available now.
She's black, he's white, they figure it out. America's third rail is what they're talking about. He's white, she's black, there's no need to fight. Microaggressions happen, but they find the light. They'll endeavor to address the